a lot of people deride his communication style and the way he talks. But if you any sort of way of measuring objectively his communication, you'd have to say he's an extraordinarily effective political communicator because he packs stadiums, right?
Yeah.
So people come and fill big like football stadiums and huge venues to see him talk. And he's also been enormously persuasive. If you consider like that he began his political campaign by raising taboo issues that no other candidate wanted to talk about, like immigration, for example. And now immigration is going to be like it's the central political issue in the United States. If not the central issue, then certainly one of the most important ones. And he has, I mean, I'd like to say single handedly, but maybe not single handedly, but he was certainly the leading voice in changing a majority of the Republicans' opinion from thinking immigration was a taboo subject uh, to now thinking it is the central and the most important subject and one of the best ways to recruit supporters and to support people. So I think extraordinarily effective communicator when measured in any sort of objective sense of how you might measure the effectiveness of communication. But people just don't like his style because it's not really, it doesn't appeal to intellectuals or people who, style themselves as intellectuals because it's sort of, um, just the way he talks. He uses short sentences and small words and a lot of repetition, and it sounds rambling. But whatever he's doing, it's working. So you can't really. It's very hard to criticize stuff that works.
And
I
it's
think.
very hard to analyze what's working with him and what's not working and how you counter that when you're running against him. I find that quite fascinating, which is why people can't put the finger on, what's the phenomenon. I mean, he just ran in the primaries against Ron DeSantis and some really incredible people who are one of my top favorite Republicans. He Ron DeSantis is doing an incredible job in Florida as the governor, and Greg Abbott. And I look at those guys and I'm like, these guys are going to be incredible presidents. But they just, Vivek was an interesting character that was just going full steam. But they just, Trump just mocked them. And you're like, what is going on here? I did watch one of his interviews where he talked about the UFC fighting. He's a big UFC fan. And to me, listening to him speak about fighting and how passionate he is, his sentences were longer, and he was very specific with the details about fighting. And I was like, oh, there we go. That's an interesting glimpse into the mind of Donald Trump. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the things you need to consider is, and I think a lot of people who are interested in politics don't like this idea, but I think it's something that's true, is that politics is really a subculture. Like only a small proportion of the population is really interested in politics, and they're kind of nerds, right? Like politics is something that appeals to like people who are maybe kind of smart and kind of nerdy, and it probably doesn't appeal really to most people, I would say. And Donald Trump is a pop culture icon. Like he's been in at least American consciousness, and as well as like people like New Zealand and around the world. He's been in the popular consciousness for a long time, like since the '80s. Like he was teasing presidential runs in the '80s and '90s.
He was, yeah.
He's been writing
Yeah.
books. He's been like thought of as this big mogul. He's had newspaper columns and stuff written about him. And more recently he's been on The Apprentice, like which is quite a high rating TV show. So everyone knows who Donald Trump is, and they don't know who all these other political guys are who maybe they talk better in a conventional political sense. But because he has this wide pop culture appeal, he can get all these people in to vote for him that the other political candidates probably can't reach. And I think that's probably a big part of it as well.
Yeah, I think so. What do you think? Do you think he's gonna win this time around?
Probably. I think he'll probably win. Although, on the other hand, I think the willingness of the Democrats to bend the rules, like with mail-in voting and like pipes bursting in voting booths so people can't turn up and vote. There's a surprising amount of that sort of stuff that's happening, and I think their willingness to do that sort of stuff and bend the rules, and find batches of votes at 2 a.m. in the morning, their willingness to do that is only expanding as time goes along.
Yeah, it's
So
so
it'll be interesting. If Trump is to win, I think he has to kind of win by like a fail-safe margin. It almost has to be like a landslide to make it sort of unriggable.
yeah.
So I think he'll probably win, but they might try and cheat him out of it, and they might succeed in cheating him out of it. We'll have to
Yeah,
wait and see.
yeah. It's fascinating that the Democrats were actually, pointing finger at Trump in terms of, Trump saying, "Oh, this is all a fraud in the 2020 elections," and now they are pretty much doing what they were blaming Trump to do, trying to rig the elections. It's
Well, elections have been rigged for a long time anyway,
yeah,
right? Even if we don't, even if we leave aside the election rules and bending the election rules, when you control the media and you are manipulating public opinion, as they have been for a long time, that's really a form of election rigging. And when you're opening the border up and bringing in a large numbers of new people who will vote for you, that's also a form of election rigging. So they've been doing those things for a long time to rig the elections to help the Democrats win. So they've been rigging elections for a long time. But also, America has a long history of doing like funny stuff, like gerrymandering their electorates, and the Republicans do this too. Like they change the way the electorate boundaries are drawn, so they put all the black people in this community, so they don't, and then they spread the conservative voters out over broader communities, so they can win more electorates and more stuff that way. So there's a lot of skullduggery in American politics, I think much more so than here. And they've been doing that stuff for a long time. And their willingness to do that is just increasing as time goes along. So
yeah. I wouldn't be surprised to see Biden installing election stations at the border as illegal people come through. They'll just vote for him.
yeah, if you want to come in, you have to vote Democrat first. Yeah. Well, yeah, here's your voting form. Just sign this, and we'll keep it in a pile
Yeah,
until election day, and then we'll use it. Yeah,
exactly.
but they've been doing stuff like that for a long time.
Yeah,
I mean, with the mail-in voting, that's like terrible. Because what they can do is they send out, election organizers to like poor inner city neighborhoods, and they get them all to go and sign the forms and who they're going to vote for, and if they, take them away and give them a free meal or whatever to encourage them to do it, and then they collect up all the forms and send them in on voting day. So there's lots of things kind of like that happen now in American politics. So a lot of those people wouldn't vote otherwise. So I mean, is that really a legitimate vote or not? I mean, it's kind of debatable, isn't it?
yeah. I think we're talking about election interference. I think that's been a culture within politics for a long time. It's just every time elections come around, we have a different fine line as to what's acceptable and what's not, in terms of how much interference that goes into, you think about all the these court cases for Trump and using that as media manipulation, that he's a criminal. Why is he allowed to run for presidency? All that stuff, it's interference in many ways.
That's right. I mean, one reason I hope that Trump wins is that if he can win with all this going on, taking him to court and trialing him in the middle of an election, which, as you say, is it's definitely a form of election interference. But if he can win in spite of all that, maybe even because of that, because in some ways it's actually giving him a lot more media attention and helping him get ahead in the polls. So if he
Yeah.
can win, it might encourage people in future not to engage in that type of potential election rigging type activity. And so that's one of the reasons I hope he wins, to discourage people from behaving that way.
Yeah, well, let's see how it plays out. I'm super excited to. I think I'd like to see him, because I quite like his foreign policy compared to the
Yeah.
Obamas and the Bidens. I think, I think there will be a different Middle East. Certainly not what's going on would go on under Trump. You
Yeah,
know,
well, this,
he's def-
he's a critic of the neoconservative foreign policy,
yeah, yeah,
right? So
yeah, and he's
the
definitely has a better relationship with Putin, and I think there'll be a different reality in Ukraine, Russia, with Trump being in power. I'd like to see
yeah,
those situations, I guess, dealt with instead of it just, it just never ends. Now we have this whole thing going on in the universities. I mean, what do you think about that? The protests and this whole Gaza and anti-Semitism in universities and the politics behind it.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's what the organizing principle in left-wing politics for a long time has been to put together a coalition of the fringes, right, against the conservative white majority in America, but also in other Western nations, right? So they want to get the in America, you want to get the your inner city liberals and your blacks and your Mexicans, your other minority groups, the gays, and put together this coalition that can rival the white conservative majority in the countries. And the problem is a lot of these groups they're trying to put together they don't have a lot in common themselves, apart from not being a part of the conservative white majority, and they have conflicts among themselves. So the people from Arab countries, Arab Muslims, have very little in common with like the gay lobby people. That in some ways they're complete opposites, and the only thing that really holds that coalition together is animus against the conservative majority in these countries. As soon as they start looking at each other rather than focusing on their dislike of the conservative majority, then they realize they have nothing in common, and they start fighting with each other. And that's what's going on the university campuses. So you've got you know, wokeness is really an extension of political correctness. So just to try and explain what's going on with the anti-Semitism, right? So a lot of the political correctness and wokeness that's come into Western politics since like the 1960s has been driven by these various movements like feminism and gay rights, and then it's gone on to transgenderism and minority rights, the civil rights movement, all this stuff. There's a lot of Jewish intellectuals involved in these movements, and they always thought that they would be counted as part of the minority group, right? One of the oppressed minorities. But the sort of the wokeness machine that's built up with this alliance of minority groups has started to lump them in with the white oppressors, and so it's sort of like the monster that they helped create has now turned on them, and you're getting a lot of these the woke protesters in universities, rather than seeing Jews and Israelis as allies, and now see them as enemies. So that's another big division in this left-wing alliance of the fringes that they've tried to put together.
Yeah, it's almost like the way I see it. I'd consider myself as a classical liberal, but the old school one, not the stuff that's going on now. It's almost like it's an extreme, and I'm starting to look more like a conservative person, but I'm not conservative. I'm a liberal, but I'm the one that makes sense to me. For
Yeah, yeah,
example, I'm okay with transgenderism. I'm not okay with that meddling with sports, because women and men are not same from a biological and physical perspective, so it's not a fair game, right? So yeah, it's
but I mean, I feel the same way about that. I mean, I consider myself conservative, right?
okay.
But I mean, some people happen to be transgender. I, I think, as far as I can tell, and it doesn't appear to be their fault. It doesn't appear to be much they can do about it. That's just the way they feel about it.
Right.
And that, I mean, it must be really tough for them. It must be really tough to be transgender. I can't really imagine what it's like, but it must be really tough. And so we should have sympathy for them, I think, and try and tolerate them and try and find ways to encourage them to be productive members of society. But putting them in the women's sports, there's an obvious problem with that, right?
Yeah.
So if you've been through male puberty, you're going to be bigger and stronger. And that gives you a huge advantage in most types of athletic endeavor. And it's actually dangerous even for women in, physical sports and contact sports like rugby or various types of, Aussie rules football, all these types of things.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just obvious reasons why you shouldn't be able to do that. And anyone who knows anything about human biology knows that that's the case. And there's also good reasons why they shouldn't be allowed into the women's toilets. Like I hate to say it, but there's a lot of, just perverts who say they're trans as an excuse to get in there and, if not abuse women, that, look up, maybe it turns them on to go into the women's toilets. Maybe they're in there. I mean, I don't know, but
Yeah. Why do you think that's
there's a lot of
happening? I
perverts
mean,
who make,
like we're an advanced society, and why do you think that's happening? Is it because people are afraid of making decisions and being PC, so they say, "Oh, well, we're including you to be classified as a woman, so that means all of a sudden, automatically, if we tell you not to go to a women's toilet, then it's actually a counter argument." Is that what's going on? Why can't there be clear definitions as to, hey, okay, this is, we include you in these, but we can't include you in these?
well, I mean, the big picture answer to that is that in Western countries, we live under an oppressive speech and thought control system called political correctness or wokeness, right? And any time a topic can be classified as, like racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, all the words, then you can face serious consequences for talking about it, including loss of job, loss of friends, loss of reputation. Countries have hate speech laws now, so you can go to court, you can be fined. There are people in jail for saying the wrong things about this. So, and what that means is it gives certain people advantages in terms of the types of political arguments that they're able to make, and it makes other people provides pretty strong disincentives for other people to counter them. So there's the political playing field has sort of been tilted by political correctness and wokeness to give advantages to these various groups. And as soon as you can say that your political views or that your cause is a civil rights movement of sorts, then it brings all the isms and the phobias into play. So, and that's what the trans people have done, right? So they've got their word, their transphobia now. And if you are against them in any way, you're transphobic, and then you have to suffer internet pile-ons and loss of reputation and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's, in a way, you can say it's a very effective political organisation and management to do things this way. You say your cause is the civil rights movement. You have a word like transphobia. Anyone who does anything, transphobic, you bully and demonise and try and destroy their reputations. It's a form of politics which we don't like, right?
Yeah.
But you have to say that the reason people do it is it's been very effective since like the 1960s. People who have conducted their politics in that way have basically won all the political battles and got their way. That's how the civil rights movement did it. It's how the gay rights movement did it.
Yeah.
It's a winning strategy,
It is.
whether we like it or
But
not, and that's why people do it.
yeah, and do you believe, or do you think, you're closer to this than I am, do you think that's changing as Elon Musk fights back with his policies around what free speech is, in the context of the Sydney stabbing and the e-safety commissioner demanding that content to be censored for the rest of the world, and the Christchurch call, do you think there is a shift happening in how we view PC and pushing back a little?
Yes, yes, I think probably, although I'm quite close to it, and in a way I'm out of the closet, so to speak, in terms of my politically incorrect views. So it's hard for me to judge um, how the average person feels about this
I
now
mean,
because I've sort
I
of become
yeah, I
too
understand.
politically correct at times.
If I use myself as an example, and what I see is there's certainly in New Zealand, since the change of government, there's been a huge shift in terms of that free expression, right?
Yeah.
How do you view that shift that we've seen in New Zealand since November last year?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think what happens is you can only push people so far, right? So the civil rights movement in America, most people, they actually made good arguments and they convinced most people, and most people now think it's just, right? And I kind
Yeah,
of agree with that, right?
yeah,
But as it's gone on through the gay rights and with the women's rights, then the gay rights, and then now the trans rights, that the quality of the arguments being made has declined as time has gone along. Like it seems less and less just, and there seems like there's more and more flaws in the cases being made. To the point where I'm not sure ordinary people are going to accept the claims of the trans rights activists, right? The only way they can really, I think, get people to accept what they're saying is by imposing it on people against their will, which requires, authoritarian measures, which is what we saw under the Ardern government. And that encourages people to organise and sort of fight back. And that's what we're starting to see now, I think. There's a free speech union in New Zealand now, which I had some involvement with. And they're an illustration of ordinary people organising, creating institutions to project power to fight back against this sort of woke trend. So I think, as you know, it's just a natural sort of every action has a reaction, and the reaction to like political correctness and wokeness has been like half a century coming. But I think it's finally we're starting to see the reaction bear fruit in terms of organising into institutions and being able to project power into the democratic conversation.
yeah. And I was excited to hear that you are involved in a new movement, the Conservative Network, which I guess is also another exciting thing that's happening apart from the free speech and everything else. And my satire media organization started because of all of that, I guess. Just more expression, but in a different comedic way. I think we need comedy, and I think we need some form of ability to have a fine line to what's real and what's not, because reality is too close to satire, and people get confused whether they're actually living in a false reality, or is it a reality based on truth and free expression of human self. So talk to me a little bit about the Conservative Network, how it's come about. What can we see more from it?
So the Conservative Network is a loose grouping of people working together on political advocacy type projects, political advocacy, social media advocacy, that sort of thing. My background is in policy advice and policy advocacy. So I used to be a policy wonk working in the government, drafting up the briefing papers that people OIA
Yeah,
to
yeah,
see what the government's up to.
yeah.
And I've also worked for several sort of lobby groups, trying to influence the policy wonks and the ministers to try and change government policy and regulations in ways that benefit, the groups I was working for. So having had that background, I just have like a certain set of skills that's useful. And what I saw is that, there's a lot of people who are politically active on social media, and there's a real opportunity, I think, to take what they're doing, the energy that's there, the manpower, and take the effectiveness of what they're doing to the next level by using some of the very basic skills that I've learned through my background in working for the government and working for advocacy groups. So I just want to help work. So I work with several individuals and groups doing stuff behind the scenes, some of which you see on my Twitter, and some of which you don't. So I mean, for example, today the Regulations Review Committee in Parliament is meeting to discuss the midwifery scope of practice. So there's a scope of practice was developed with, it took an inordinate amount of consultation and money to change this one-page scope of practice. And what they did is they just put a whole bunch of woke crap into it, and they didn't want to use the word woman or mother or baby, just silly stuff.
Yeah, so you're trying to ban things like chest feeding, back to breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's So there's stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, what I do in the Conservative Network is I work with groups like this group involved in the midwifery scope of practice, and try and help them with their advocacy work. And some of the jobs I do are paid, but a lot of it is unpaid. It's just about. I also help groups with their social media, and other stuff like that. And so that's what it is. It's just about trying to level up the I guess the right wing the Twitter sphere in New Zealand that's interested in politics.
Yeah.
Not just right wing people, because there are some left wing people who do things that I'm interested in and want to support as well, but mostly right wing people.
Yeah. And so can you?
It's about leveling up and trying to help them be more effective.
Yeah. Can you mention a few other initiatives that you can? I know I've seen on X that you've worked on advocating for the puberty blockers.
Yeah, so we wrote a series of letters to ministers over the use of puberty blockers in New Zealand, which I have had a response from, but it was kind of a fob-off response. Like they delegated the response to some person within the Ministry of Health or something like that, rather than the minister's offices responding directly to me. But yeah, I mean, there's been, as you'll be aware, there's been a large public discussion ongoing about the appropriateness of prescribing puberty blockers to children. When you give a kid puberty blockers, I mean, the rationale that they use for why they want to do it is they say it delays puberty and it buys the kid time to decide whether he wants to be carry on being a boy or turn into a girl, or carry on being a girl and turn into a boy.
Okay.
Puberty blockers don't just delay puberty; they can cause irreversible damage to people. It can result in chemical castration, basically, and sterility, so you can no longer have children, and it's quite horrific. And the
how many kids are on puberty blockers? Do you know?
I have seen those figures. I know, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I know on a per population basis, there's 10 times as many kids, roughly 10 times as many kids in New Zealand on puberty blockers in England. It's still a relatively low number, but like in the hundreds, I think. But yeah, there's more on a per capita basis in New Zealand. But that's hundreds of kids in New Zealand who are potentially sterile and can no longer have kids.
Jesus.
And are children really able to understand, we're talking about sometimes, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, before, that's the region before you hit puberty.
Yeah.
Are you really able to understand the concept of sterility and not being able to have children and other, the other potential risk factors Like it does things to your bone density. Like some of the people who are on this, when they get older, they have arthritis. There's all sorts of negative complications that can come from it. And it's because you have to do it before puberty when the kids are quite young. It's very doubtful that they are capable of understanding and consenting to that.
Yeah.
You have to be 18 to go to the pub in New Zealand. You have to be 16 to drive. Is it 18 to vote?
Yeah. 18
But
to
we're
have
getting kids as
tattoos.
young as 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 consent to puberty blockers that can have these negative, really disastrous health effects. And one of the, for a long time, or since the ancient Greece, like the ethic of doctors has been like first do no harm, right? That's the Hippocratic Oath. First do no harm. That's not what's going on here. It is doing harm
Yeah.
to the kids.
Yeah.
And so it's not. So there have been people who have been saying this for a while. People have been saying it much longer than me. I'm not going to say I was in on the ground floor and started this, but I noticed it before these reports recently, which have come out by respected intellectuals and doctors in the field, which have basically confirmed what I've just said. So there's the NHS a while ago, which is Britain's National Health Service, decided that they were no longer going to prescribe puberty blockers to children. Then the WPATH files revelations came out. So WPATH is like the International Trans Healthcare Organization, which helps write and inform the guidelines that a lot of other health ministries in various countries use for what they do about trans healthcare and things like prescribing puberty blockers.
Yeah.
But that group was largely run by a lot of trans people, like activists who are very pro doing this. And what was in the WPATH files revealed that they were basically harming children in the ways we've been described, and that also that the conversations they were having with the kids and their parents revealed that it's very difficult for the kids to understand the consequences, and that they're unable to consent to it. And there's videos involved in the WPATH files of the doctors and the experts talking about this, and they discuss this. They say, look, the kids are unable to. When I talk to them about the potential problems that might happen, they're unable to understand it, and it's the experts that are saying this. So that's what the WPATH files are about. And the latest thing to happen is the CAS report, which is by a respected British academic on this subject, and she's basically exploded the rationale for doing this. She said there's not really any evidence that it has positive effects. And so several countries have now banned prescription of puberty blockers for children. I can't rattle them off from the top of my head, but I think like the UK and Sweden and several others.
Yeah, it seems to be happening now. Everyone's kind of realizing what the hell is going on over here.
The Ministry of Health in New Zealand, in December last year, they said, look, we're going to be updating our guidelines for the use of puberty blockers. And that update hasn't come yet. So that was expected to happen like earlier in February, then March, then April, like still hasn't happened.
Right.
So we're hoping that when they update that, they're going to say, look, we no longer support the use of puberty blockers for children. But and that's what we're lobbying for. That's what we hope is going to happen.
No, that has to happen because it's not, like you said, kids can't make those decisions. And it seems to be a culture where community, I'm going to say community, and that involves teachers, parents, and everybody else involved in creating culture in society where somehow we make this acceptable that we should give kids more choices or listen to them more, and do those things to them, which, now we have this massive trend of detransitioners. We have we
Yeah.
have influencers who are now detransition detransitioned influencers, you know. And it's funny, there's a you posted about this today, and so did I, about this latest LGBTQ plus flag that's been
Yeah.
announced. And
As the detransitioners, are they on there?
exactly.
That's what I was just going
Yeah,
to ask
yeah,
you. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's, I'm sure somewhere they're included in that. You know, we have this new detransition group, and you know, it's just, yeah, it's insane what's going on in that space. I'm interested in understanding the latest state of politics in New Zealand and the latest polls that happened, I think, a couple of days ago. What are your thoughts on those two? I guess, would you say that the polls are just rigged and they're just mainstream media bullshit? Or would you say that if you look deep enough, it does reveal the realities of the state of politics in New Zealand?
I don't think you can say it's bullshit.
Okay.
Like, I think the polls are, as far as I can tell, the polls are genuine, right? But there's a lot of variability between polls, right? So you probably shouldn't take any one individual poll as gospel, but looking at the trend in polls over time allows you to paint a good picture. So there was the TV One News Varian poll, which showed the government plunging out of power, and but the main reason for that is because it had New Zealand First dropping below the 5% threshold, and then small falls for National and Act as well, which meant that without New Zealand First and with the small falls for National and Act, the government wouldn't get back into power because New Zealand First wouldn't come back in at all. Um, so subsequent to that, we've also had the Roy Morgan poll come out, which has smaller falls for all three parties, but it shows they still have a significant majority, a significant advantage over the opposition parties. So they would, according to that poll, although their supporters dropped slightly, they would still be in power in government
Yeah.
if there was, an election result reflected those polls.
Yeah. And I wonder if we're
They
having,
still have a significant majority.
yeah. And I wonder, you know, the elections are 2.5 years away. So why would the media talk about the fact that, oh, because of these numbers, they will not be in power if we had an election today? Well, actually, people are not doing the polls based on it being an election. They're probably just expressing the state of the country and politics right now, and the state of their lives or what's going on in New Zealand. They're probably voting, polling based on that. Would that be a fair way of looking at it? I'm just trying to find the truth in why people have polled for those numbers for each party.
Well, you're asking me about the media's reaction. I mean, there's two reasons why the media would react with such glee and excitement over the coalition government plunging out of power. One is that sensationalism sells, right, and it gets them good ratings. So they obviously want to hype up their poll results and get a lot of people watching and create a lot of buzz around that just for their own ratings. So in a way, you can't really begrudge them too much for that. Like, but the other reason is that they are biased and on the left wing's side themselves. Polls of journalists, not polls, but studies of journalists asking them, what their own political leanings are, and you have consistently showed in New Zealand and a lot of other countries as well that they're left wing people, and they have left wing views, and you can see that reflected in the way they cover issues.
Yeah.
And I think, Mikey Sherman, who's the One News political editor, she reacted with a lot of glee and excitement to the poll result, and part of that is just to hype up the poll result. But the other part, of course, is that she's biased and she doesn't like that government and she wants to see them out of power, and so she's really excited about
Yeah,
it. And
I think that's very,
wants to share it.
I agree. And I think that's very obvious to see. If you're awakened, you can see those two, very clearly. If I take the media out of the way and just look at the polls, what do you think it says about the state of politics in New Zealand and the coalition government and the opposition's views on where we are at? What does it say to you?
Well, the media, the mainstream media in New Zealand is reducing in their audience and in their power and their ability to influence the electorate. but they still have a lot of power and influence, and they have been basically running they've been leading the campaign against the coalition government since they got in, running negative story after negative story to try and damage them and dent them and get their polls to fall, and they've succeeded a little bit. So that's what I would put it down to.
Do you think the coalition government is doing a good job, or do you think that there are things that they could do better, or things that are not going as well as they campaign for?
Well, they've spent the first 6 months, the first 100 days,
Yeah.
was all about repealing a lot of laws and initiatives that Labor had put in, and they did all that. And now they've started to roll out some of their own policies and programs. But I think from a communications perspective, from a political management perspective, the difficulty they have is they can't really decide whether their messaging is about being, like moderate and responsible, or whether it's more the Winston Peters going on the attack, sticking it to the woke people and the Maori separatists and the media. So they've got, within the government, you've got both those tendencies. So I don't know for sure, but I think Christopher Luxon is kind of moderate in terms of temperament and in terms of his preferred political strategy.
And he's PC as well. I think he's PC. That's how I view him. He's more PC. He's more PC than John Key. John Key was more of that entrepreneurial, like that Elon Musk. He had a bit of a temperament. John Key had that temperament, but Luxon's more of that bureaucrat. He's from the corporate bureaucratic world, so he's more PC.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to the supporters of the coalition government, right? There would be some supporters who would prefer the more moderate approach, and there would also be some supporters who would prefer the more of the firebrand approach. And it's very hard to keep them both happy at the same time. But one of the ways you can try to keep them both happy is you've got 3 different parties in there, right? And they can try and run their own communications and political messaging in different ways to cater to those different groups at the same time. But what I think is going on here is that they're caught between whether they want to be moderate or whether they want to be really aggressive in their messaging, and they're probably losing support a little bit from both groups, the ones who would prefer the more go and get them, attack the woke, and from the more moderate side, because you can't really do both those things at once. I think that's probably a big part of it.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. I quite like the dynamics of the 3 leaders, but I think it's like it's something is not consistent in terms of their communication to the public. It's like Winston pops up and he'll make a big noise and then he disappears, and then it'll pop up again, and then so it's almost like it's not consistent. And someone, I've always been a national voter, and I'll always be a national voter, even though I agree with them maybe 38% of what their policies are, because I believe that it's a too big party play, and I am about free markets, I am about capitalism, I am about all the things that I think are important to maintain as a base, and I don't want to fluctuate between the smaller parties, although I like the smaller parties being more outspoken. I'd rather prefer to have entrepreneurs coming through the National Party like John Key that are more, I guess, fly to the edge of what National Party is. But I think it's almost like inconsistent, and I wonder whether the portfolio allocations are right. You look at the whole Melissa Lee situation. I thought she was doing a very effective job at what media should be. It shouldn't be something that's funded by taxpayers. It should be something that should be a private venture, and I thought she was taking quite a hard line, and as it should. And now we have a sorry, carry on. You want to say?
Well, I was just going to say it's very difficult. I mean, I'm not in the minister's office observing how effective she is at directing her officials to pursue this option or not this option, and how over the detail of the material she is. So I can't really comment on how effective she is because I don't know. All we can really comment on is how well she handles her interface with the media, her public interviews, and the way, I mean, my observation of how she did is she declined a lot of interviews with the media, right? When she did talk to them, she kind of said, "Oh well, there's not a lot I can do." And I mean, personally, I kind of agree with that position that maybe we shouldn't be bailing out, particularly shouldn't be bailing out News Hub, right? However, maybe that's not the PR approach that the Prime Minister wanted in the portfolio. So maybe she wasn't across the detail. I don't know, but also maybe she didn't handle her engagements with the media in the way
But
Chris Luxon
but
likes.
that but
The
but,
other
but that
thing
but
to
that but that
consider,
situation was created by Luxon and Winston themselves. They were the ones who came out and said the PGIF fund was not the right thing. It's damaged the perception of the media, and that set off all the media going, "What the hell do you think you're saying?" And we're gonna go after you. And obviously, in the end, the hospital pass goes to Melissa Lee because she's the minister. But I think that was created. That environment was created by Luxon and Winston Peters for making those statements. Winston started it, and then Luxon
yeah,
agreed
well,
with him.
Winston made a lot of political hay out of criticizing the Public Interest Journalism Fund, and also just criticizing the media as he always has done. He's always made a lot of political hay out of criticizing the media, so you can't blame him for doing that.
No, no.
And one of the problems for being a small party in government is when small parties go into coalition, they almost always do poor and struggle to get in the next time round of the next election because they kind of get they it's hard for them to distinguish themselves from the government and have their own political messaging while inside a coalition government because you've got a whole bunch of things like I forget the term, but cabinet responsibility, where you're not allowed to contradict the cabinet, and once the cabinet makes a decision, you've got to be on board with it, and so that makes it very hard from a political standpoint to distinguish your party from the main party, and so it's hard for small parties electorally after they've gone into a coalition. But and this goes back to your earlier point, what Luxon appears to be doing is he appears to be trying to give Winston Peters and David Seymour more of a free hand to say what they want, say their own thing. And that's probably a good thing for those parties in terms of their ability to market themselves and keep themselves up in the polls for the next election. And whether it works, whether it's enough, the only way to see will be when that election comes. But what it does mean is you don't have consistent messaging coming from the top, from the government, because you've got Winston and David Seymour saying their own thing to a certain extent. So you can't have everything, right?
Yeah,
It's a call, it seems like Luxon has made to give them more independence to say their own thing.
yeah,
But it comes with a lack of consistent messaging for the government.
yeah, and there's obviously two type of messages. One is Winston Peters being the in government as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and there is another style of communication he does when he is speaking from his party's perspective, where he's much more
You're right. That's a good observation. They're very different.
very, very
He's
different.
he's very formal and very sort of respectful in his role as Foreign Affairs Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, but he's very comes out all guns blazing in his role as leader of New Zealand First.
Yeah.
So yeah, very good observation.
Yeah, it's almost like a personality disorder. But yeah, and I think that can confuse people, and that's why it's gonna, he's almost like when he's on the roll and he's on the road flying around the world, he's kind of switched off. He's not doing a lot of that crazy stuff he'll do on X, and you wonder like what's going on X's recommend algorithm, because I can't seem to see anything that's coming from Winston. But when I go to his profile, he's actually not doing any of that for like a good 2-3 weeks, and then all of a sudden he's back, and then he disappears again. So that's I'm not too sure how that plays with the public and how they perceive it. But I certainly prefer that you gotta be, I prefer the Winston when he's like, speaking from his party's perspective, and I think that needs to be in the government. When I compare that kind of communication with other leaders around the world, for example, the president of Argentina,
Oh, Malay.
he is, there's not too different. There's not two versions. It's still, I mean, he's kind of carried on how he used to communicate when he was campaigning, and he's very aggressive with his approach, and he's managed to achieve a budget surplus in being in government shorter than the New Zealand new government being in government.
Yeah, well, populism is on the rise all around the world, right-wing populism, but also left-wing populism. And that's as a result of governments implementing policies that a lot of ordinary people don't like. And so you have populists who reject the policies of, like, even the people on their own side of the political spectrum. New Zealand's actually a pioneer in terms of right-wing populism. We had Rob Muldoon back in, when was that? When was he in? The 70s and 80s?
Yeah.
I could have that wrong. I think that's roughly right. And Winston was Rob Muldoon's heir apparent to the National Party leadership. But he got booted out by Jim Bolger after Bolger took over leadership of the National Party, because he wasn't on board with the sort of the neoliberal economic direction. So we've had the right-wing populist style in politics long before, in New Zealand, long before people like Donald Trump and Javier Milei and all these other people came along. So we're pioneers in that sense.
And where does Hitler sit in terms of his politics? Was he? But he was quite a populist. I mean, he was quite famous, and he got.
I don't know if you'd call Hitler a populist, but he certainly appealed, had popular appeal, didn't he? That's how he got voted in.
Yeah, I mean, he got what 80+% of the votes or something like that. I think.
Did he get that high? I mean,
I don't know, but he was quite popular, is my point, in terms of, we talk about populist. Hitler was very popular. I mean, and for a very, very long time.
well, his popularity was a function of people didn't like the opposition at the time, and so he was able to.
Right.
They had extremely divisive politics in Germany at the time.
Right.
And he was able to make a lot of hay out of criticizing the communists, right, the other side of the spectrum. But yeah, Hitler's not a good guy.
I am not saying that he's a good guy. I'm just, I'm.
We don't want to be drawing too many parallels between Hitler and the other.
Let's not get cancelled. Yeah, let's not get
It's always
cancelled.
important to try and be the good guys.
Yeah,
not
yeah,
try
yeah.
and be the bad guys.
Yeah, and it's with what's going on in Europe right now, and this whole pro-Hamas supporters, you certainly have to wonder, how are we allowing extremism and these kind of behaviors kind of become normal in society? There was, I did a story about this extreme Islamist movement in Germany, where these groups are demanding that Germany allow the establishment of a caliphate that can then be in government. I mean, that stuff is just borderline Hitler behavior, right?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of this type of stuff is a function of the immigration policies and the multicultural policies, where you've had large minority groups build up in Western countries who disagree with a lot of the fundamental premises of Western liberal democracy, and the Muslim populations in Europe are like that to a significant extent, and it's causing real problems for democracy. So, what do you do when people organise within the democratic system to try and implement anti-democratic things?
Well, it's
And
I don't think
numbers
it's
are only
democratic to complain about there's too many white people in power. How is that democratic? That is. I'm talking about the first prime minister who's now resigned of Scotland. How can how
Humza
Yes,
Yusuf.
Hamza Yusuf. Yeah. How do you stand in a country like Scotland and say everybody's white? It- what the hell? That is nothing. That is not democratic in my view. That is anti-democratic. Yeah, you're in
It's
Scotland.
not. I
Yes.
wouldn't say it's anti-democratic, but I would say it's insulting to white people. Right? I mean, Scotland is a white country. It's almost, it's like over 90% white. It's been a white country all its history. I mean,
Exactly. Like, what do you?
the white population's falling now as the immigrants rise, but there's still a strong majority in the country. And for the prime minister well, he's not the prime minister, the first minister they call
Yeah.
him, for him to stand up and to say, "Oh, there's too many white people in charge of things in Scotland." Well, I mean, that's insulting. But to be fair to him, like, there's a, it's not really a racial thing, because there's a lot of white academics who say exactly the same things, and I think it's just as insulting when they say it. Like, you, no one would. All those people believe strongly in the politically correct norms of anti-racism and anti-discrimination, and they would never say things like, "Oh, there's too many black people in power. We should get black people out of power." Or there's any other minority group. There's too many Jewish people in power. We have to get rid of the Jewish people, take them out of power. That sort of talk, they would be totally against it, but they think it's fine to do it when it's white people. So
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So you can't do that. That's just not on.
yeah, but this attitude has been incubated in our universities and is now in our media and is also in our public sector and is making its way into the corporate world as well. That's why we have populism. One of the reasons, at least. I mean, if you have a intellectual movement that has captured the heights of power, which is fundamentally hostile to the majority of the population, of course that's going to engender some sort of backlash from ordinary people, and a willingness to a desire to organise and form institutions to protect their values and their interests
Yeah.
and their country from being totally transformed and changed in ways that are antithetical to them and their interests and their values. You can't blame ordinary people for reacting in that way. Of course they're going to.
Yeah, and that's why you need satire. to,
Well, the comedians, you're right. I mean, comedy is kind of like the last line of defense, right?
yeah.
You, when people make serious arguments as to why political correctness or wokeness is wrong, um, those people get attacked and taken down. But comedians get more leeway, right? Society grants comedians more leeway. So they're able to uh, critique and mock and make fun of these things. They're kind of like the last line of defense. The last people in society who get shut down and cancelled are the comedians. Now, they're actually starting to come for the comedians now.
Yeah.
So Jerry Seinfeld was on
Yes.
TV the other day.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
he's right. I remember.
So that should be a warning sign to people. That when they start to want to shut down and target and demonize and destroy the comedians, the authoritarian impulse has gone too far, and you have to try and turn it around and
Yeah.
fix them.
Yeah, I think he's right. I mean, I remember growing up as a child, coming home from school, everything I wanted as a late stage teenager was comedy. Seinfeld and Jim Belushi was, he had his own TV show as well. It was just comedy everywhere, and that was fun. Now it doesn't really exist. I think Joe Rogan talks a lot about it in terms of how it's censored in most of these stand-up comedy clubs.
Yeah.
And he has his own comedy club now called the Comedy Mothership in Austin, Texas. But you're right. I think there's a yeah, it's definitely gone too far.
Comedy is kind of transgressive in nature, though. Like, I mean, I think it's possible to have a joke without someone being the butt of the joke or something. But normally, comedy involves making fun of someone or something. And in our society, at least up until quite recently, like we've tried to inculcate an attitude of, tolerance for people who make jokes and make fun of you. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
the woke can't laugh at themselves, and they can't laugh at their own ideology.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
a serious problem when they're in charge of things.
yeah. It's
Instead of reacting with ha ha ha, oh yeah, good one, you got me that time, they react with oh, you can't say that. We're going to shut you down.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I've certainly the thing with comedy is you can't. The subject of the joke has got nothing to do with the target of the joke. They're two separate things. So there's nothing that you can't joke about. You can joke about the Holocaust, rape, public figures. You can mock them. This doesn't mean that it's got anything to do with personally with that person. You're creating comedy, and I certainly find what I have been doing, especially with the satire that I started, that randomly got into it. And the shift was obviously the change in government. And I think the first satire that I ever did was, it's Monday morning, we have a new government and we are officially allowed to smoke in the office. And that was like a picture of Don Draper smoking a cigarette in the office, from the TV series Mad Men. But I think I can confidently say that I've had zero complaints against all, I've written maybe 200 articles today, and mostly to do with New Zealand culture and censorship and politics. And I haven't had any complaints or not that I'm aware of, in terms of complaints. And we're just doing a full-on website like Babylon B, New Zealand version. And it's good. We need that to be. We're actually doing two websites because there is. We need satire, fake news for comedy, but we also need real news that should be fake news or should be satire because it's too absurd to be real news, right?
Yeah.
And sorry, go on.
Oh, well, I was just going to agree with you. I mean, that's the problem with satire these days, is that reality is sort of getting ahead of satire. So it's very hard to satirize something that's already so ridiculous.
It's a tough gig. It's a tough gig. You're trying to come up with comedy that's already comedy, and you're like, whoa, how do I top this, But there's very simple and powerful ways that we do things. I think one of the good examples is that, AUT ran a poll and media reported how shocking it is that, only 67% of New Zealanders believe in the media. That's one side of the story. And so for us to write satire, we wrote something along the lines of, wow, 33% of New Zealanders believe the media. That's almost 1 million people. We need to go save them. They're in trouble because, they believe in the media. That's not a good thing, So it's sometimes that's actually not a satire fake story. That's a real story. It's true. If you believe in that poll, 33% of people believe in what the media is saying, and they create their realities around that. They listen to radio, they listen to the 6 p.m. news, they listen to what these folks write in mainstream media. That's frankly dangerous. You have to have diversity of thought in terms of where you're getting your information from. So yeah, it's a I think it's important, and we need it in New Zealand media. And we're just about to launch two websites, one's satire and one's not satire. So there's going to be a lot of stories that we're going to publish, global and local news that should be satire. And there's a lot of stuff we're going to write that's actually really fake news. But I like to write fake news not just to get a comedic laugh out of it. You know, it's not just we're trying to, I guess, awaken people through comedy, through fake news comedy. And sometimes it's very hard to realize what's going on when you're in the midst of it. But comedy allows you kind of to take that step back and awaken faster through satire than you would by having these normal conversations that go on X. And I think that's probably why it's kind of taken off. Like I've never seen before. Yeah, we definitely need that. What else is going on in your world?
Oh, I think we've discussed most of the things I'm involved in. Have we run out of stuff to talk about?
Not at all. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to see if you want to talk about something something specific. Talk to me about the great replacement theory. What are your thoughts on that? I know you've posted something about it on X a couple of days ago, or it was the Dutch girl that's kind of gone viral on X about talking about the great replacement theory. And
Well, I mean, the Great Replacement is just a name for the process of mass immigration and demographic change that's happening in most majority white countries where the white proportion of the population is going down. So it's something that's obviously happening. It's not really a theory. It's just a name for what is happening. People don't like you talking about it because they realize that it's unpopular with large numbers of the people in countries for this to be happening, and that they never asked for it to happen. They never wanted it to happen. So they're trying to hush up conversation about it. So that's why there's a taboo around talking about it, right? And as we discussed earlier, like I think, political correctness, wokeness. I mean, what this really is a sort of speech and thought control system that prevents people talking about topics that are unfavourable to, the politically correct woke left-wing interests. And the taboo around talking about the Great Replacement theory is just another example of that. So, I mean, of course we should talk about it in a democracy. I mean, people, in order to have a proper democracy, people need to be able to have discussions, be informed about the things that are happening around them, have discussions about the best policy choices and parties to vote for in order to address those sorts of problems. And if you can't have those conversations, then do you really have a real democracy? Or is that another form of rigging democracy, as we talked about earlier? And so that's really why I talk about the Great Replacement, because it's an important thing that's happening in society that's a taboo around talking about. So I want to break down that taboo so we can discuss what's happening, discuss whether we think it's a good or a bad thing, and propose different policies that may address the problem and fix it.
what do you think? Why is it got to a point where what is actually really happening that it's got to a point that it's censored and become taboo to not talk about, or it's quite sensitive to talk about? Why do you think that is? Why have we got to that point? What's actually going
Well,
on?
it's just an extension of political correctness and wokeness in one respect. Like, there's lots of things you can't talk about. And any subject that's racist or sexist or homophobic or xenophobic or anti-Semitic, there's a taboo around talking about. Now, there are many good reasons why you wouldn't want to talk about some of those things, right? So I don't think it's good to, use anti-Semitic insults against Jewish people, for example. However, there's lots of subjects that are legitimate subjects of conversation in democracies that also fall under these labels. And the Great Replacement theory would be one of them. People think it's racist or white supremacist if you object to the Great Replacement theory, right?
Yeah.
But is it? I don't think it always is. Like, you can make legitimate arguments that the reason we have separate countries in the first place is to enable people to have the right of self-determination, right? So the right of self-determination is a human right that all peoples have. It's in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is the international treaty that most countries in the world have signed up to, including New Zealand. And self-determination means that a people, like a distinct ethnic or cultural or religious group, have the right to determine their own political destiny. And one of the ways you do that is through having your own nation, which you can enact the policies that suit you and your people best, and you can, control your own destiny as a people. That's what self-determination means. And mass immigration of people unlike you who have different values and different interests takes away your ability to control your own destiny in that way. And it's very obvious. If you go down below 50% of the population, for example, you're unable to control your own destiny in a democracy through the normal voting means. So you can see why it's a problem. It takes away the fundamental human right of self-determination.
Are you aware of the color blindness theory? The Coleman Hughes, he talks about color blindness. Are you aware of that?
The idea that all human beings are the same, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the idea that you don't want to create a reality that that are like, oh, this is a group of people, this is a minority group, so we need to protect these, or we create unfair settings, unequal settings that these group need to be, attended to before the larger groups because they're unfairly treated, and so we colorblinded means that
the mistake that's being made here is the idea that mass immigration and multiculturalism fixes that problem. Mass immigration and multiculturalism is causing that problem, right? The reason we have so many different minority groups in the country fighting and competing and having divisive politics is because we embarked on this policy of mass immigration and multiculturalism in the first place. If having your own country for your own ethnic group is a way of managing and reducing ethnic conflict, it's not a way of increasing it, right? And I think what the mistake that's been made here is that after World War II, where Hitler went on his bloody rampage, which was obviously a terrible thing, which I condemn, in case anyone is concerned that I don't condemn it.
Yeah.
People drew the conclusion that nations and nationalism were bad and necessarily led to violence. And there's a lot of intelligent people thought that, well, what we need to do is we need to, mix people up. So individual ethnic groups and, religious groups and cultural groups, linguistic groups don't have their own countries. And so they can no longer commandeer the vehicle of the state to commit violence against others. Mm-hmm. But what that's led to is violence and conflict and divisions within states instead of between states, which is, it should have been predictable, but that's what's happened. Mm. I just think the wrong conclusions have been drawn there. The modern nation state, people have always clustered together on the basis of having things in common, throughout all of human history. But the modern nation state was invented after the Peace of Westphalia in Europe, and that what happened was you had the invention of the printing press, right? So, and prior to that, the Catholic Church was largely in charge of everything. But then you had the invention of the printing press, new ideas get out there. Then shortly after that, Protestantism was invented, right? So you've got these new ideas getting out there. You get Protestantism. You had a bunch of religious wars in Europe. So Europe was racked by religious wars where many, many people died as a result of that. And then the way Europeans decided to try and manage this problem and prevent the religious wars was through the principle of state sovereignty during the Peace of Westphalia, where they gave different nations their own, different peoples their own nations, and said you can run your own nation how you like and have your own religion within your own nation. So, this is a Protestant nation, this is a Catholic nation. And that was a way of solving the problem of religious conflicts and religious wars by, by having the principle of state sovereignty. So I just think that that's a historical lesson that we should have learned from. And perhaps we're going to have to learn again
Yeah.
to try and address the problem of our politics becoming increasingly divisive along sectarian
Yeah,
lines.
I think if you look through the lens of color blindness, I would say that we don't need a ministry of Pacific peoples. We don't need a minister of women. All those sort of we don't need a Maori health authority because color blindness philosophy talks about what David Seymour keeps banging on about. Everybody's equal and everybody needs to have access to what they need. And so the services, public services must be prioritized around making sure that everybody gets that. And it's about, you're judging people based on their character and their skills, not their ideology and skin color or what group they belong to.
Well, once they're in the country, obviously you should respect everyone's human rights. But the fact of the matter is that there are important differences between people, which you can cut along religious lines or cultural lines or ethnic lines and so on. Like different peoples are different. The type of societies that Muslim people like to live in, not just like to live in, but maybe are better suited to in order to get the best out of them, in order for Muslim people to thrive, they probably, or they may very well need a different type of society than other sorts of people, than people in Western liberal democracies, for example. We have like 200 years worth of experience living with a, a kind of a liberal system, liberal self-governance. Muslims don't have, and it's not just Muslims, but other peoples don't have that 200 years of experience living with that system. They're used to different systems. And they have different values, they have different interests, and it's not surprising that they come up with different governments, different institutional arrangements, different policies to reflect their different character as a people. That's not a bad thing, that's not a racist thing, that's an expression of democracy. It's an expression of self-determination. That's an expression of freedom. And if you don't allow people to express themselves collectively in those different ways, live in the different types of societies that they want to live in, you're really imposing a type of authoritarianism on them.
Yeah.
Right? You're constraining them to live. Everyone, you're saying everyone must live under the same sort of system. There can only be one sort of system, and everyone has to live under it. That's an authoritarian position.
Yeah.
That's not the position of freedom. So I think there's a mix up here where people have got that kind of backwards.
Yeah. So just I if I was to just ask you based on what you've just said now, Muslim people, different systems, not everybody has to, live in this one liberal democratic system. I guess that's what you were kind of using, maybe implying as an example. How do you fix the situation between Israel and Palestine? What's your views in terms of the systems and the politics of these two different groups of people?
Yeah.
And how do you resolve it? Because this has been going on for 75 years.
Well, I mean, I have a boringly conventional view on that,
Yeah.
and that's the two-state solution. This is what all the vast majority of international experts for a long time have thought. You need an independent Palestinian state alongside the Jewish state of Israel. So the Palestinians can run their affairs their way and the Jews can run their affairs their way. Now, I mean, it's easy to say that, and it's obviously very hard to do it, because if it was easy to do it, it would have been done. But I don't think there's a better solution than that. I just think we all need to, and that's the position of the New Zealand government. That's the position of the international community. I don't have, like I don't have a different radical solution to it. I just think that's the obvious, and that's the obvious common sense solution. It's just hard to do when you have such enmity between the two peoples, and such a willingness to fight and die to control that land. So, I mean, you're asking me to solve the Israel-Palestine conflict in a podcast, and I'm not going to be able to do it. You know? But
I
all I
think
can tell you is I think that the solution that the vast majority of experts have suggested is probably on the right track.
I think so. I believe in that. I think, if we think about what creates peace and peaceful civilizations or gatherings of people, cities are very crucial, but also,
And what I would say, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but what I would say is, I mean, a lot of people, the one state solution would be a disaster, right? A one state solution in Israel Palestine would be a disaster. We've seen that in, I mean, there are a lot of problems in South Africa during apartheid, right? But post apartheid, there are a lot of different problems in South Africa. They haven't solved that problem as well. There's ongoing killings of poor farmers. I mean, they can't keep the power on in South Africa. There's lots of problems. If you had the Jewish people and the Palestinian people within one state, the state of Israel, what would happen to the Jewish people is that they would slowly be killed. Maybe not slowly, maybe fast, but they would be killed. They would be ethnically cleansed out of that land by the Palestinian people around them. And so I just don't think that they need the government to protect them. That's what a government is for. Your government is the solution to a collective action problem, the problem of collective self-defense, among other things. Governments do other things too, but the main thing a government is there for is it's the solution to the problem of providing collective self-defense for a particular group of people. And if you took the Israelis' government off them, they would suffer greatly. So I think that that should never be done. They have a right to defend themselves. I mean, I think technically I would count as a Zionist, like, because I believe all peoples have the right to self determination,
right.
and that includes the Jewish people, right? Even though I think there's a lot of problems, it's bordering on genocide and ethnic cleansing, what they're doing in Gaza, and so I condemn it. But still, I think they have a right to their own state, just like all other peoples do, and they have a right to defend themselves as well, even if I think they've gone overboard in this instance.
Yeah, I mean, you can also have the argument that what's going on, it's sort of the consequence of urban warfare. And I think Coleman Hughes talks about that, and he challenges Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan believes that what Israel is doing is genocide. And Coleman Hughes says, well, no, it's urban warfare. There is a consequence. Civilians are always harmed. And the death toll can be 300,000 people, Palestinians, and it can still carry on the war. And two-state solution.
Well, it's very. I mean, it's not all. The truth isn't all on one side there. Like Israel is in a very tough spot, and the Hamas do use human shields, so it is a very difficult situation. Like any military action that they take is necessarily going to involve quite extreme
It is, and
civilian
yep,
casualties. But I mean, there is a long-standing principle that we've used in like our decision on when it comes to the justice of war making, like just war theory, and that's the principle of proportionality, right? And the principle of proportionality means that a war is only a just war if the casualties and the damage you inflict as a result of that war are minimized, and that they don't go overboard in reaction to the threat that's posed, right? So, I mean, the question, so like, I think over 30,000 Palestinians have been killed.
Yeah, so
Oh, no, it's more than that, isn't it?
I think it's somewhere around that number. And the argument, obviously, it's important to mention that these numbers are coming from an Hamas-run government health ministry in Gaza. So you can't really, how much truth is in these numbers. The counter argument is that that's not all civilians. There is about, I think, 19,000 civilians and 13,000 Hamas soldiers. There's about 40 to 50,000 total Hamas soldiers, I believe there is, in Gaza. Those are some of the numbers that I got from what Coleman Hughes was referring to in the Joe Rogan podcast.
I mean, it's still a high number. There's still a lot of civilian casualties. And you have to ask, is the number of civilian casualties, and even children, is that for what their strategic gains Israel is getting? Is that number of civilian casualties acceptable? And I don't think it is. They're not. How is this behavior? I mean, what I don't understand about the way Israel is behaving is like, I mean, I accept that their right to self-defense, but it seems counterproductive what they're doing. Like, this is only going to engender. I mean, Israel had a lot of positive PR, positive feeling in the West from Western populations, and this war has destroyed a lot of the positive feeling that, I'm struggling to come up with a better word than positive feeling, but Westerners backed Israel.
Yeah.
And they don't back them so much now
No.
because of the sheer number of civilian casualties. And they didn't have to do it, but they did. And so I question it just in terms of in terms of strategy. Like, what's their strategy here? Surely the Western support is worth a huge amount to Israel. Why would they jeopardize it? What are they actually gaining from doing this? It's almost as if they want to be hated. Like, I don't understand it. I literally don't understand why they're doing it.
Yeah, and they have shifted what anti-Semitism is. Anti-Semitism is, we used to cancel people like Kanye West, who would come out and say Jewish people are controlling the music industry. We would take Kanye West off all the platforms. That was anti-Semitism before October the 7th. Now, anti-Semitism is, it's not being a student at university and just, becoming a terrorist organization supporter. It's shifted. You're right. I think it's shifted. And I love Elon Musk's views on it. On the Lex Fridman podcast, he said that the best thing that Israel could have done is to not overreact. By every one Palestinian you kill, you create 10, 20 more Hamas soldiers of, their brothers and cousins and family members decide, well, I'm going to become an extremist and I'm going to attack. A two-state solution is, I think, the way to go, but it's also quite concerning to see the likes of the US vetoing any UN vote to allow Palestine to have full access and be a member of the United Nations, which is, the first steps of becoming a recognized country and then a two-state solution. If they're gonna, why send billions of dollars of weaponry to Israel and not invest that money in a two-state solution? And then you look at what's going on in Gaza. You have Hamas is a consequence of crime syndicate families that run Gaza. Netanyahu wants to eradicate Hamas, cause all this civilian harm, and then hand over Gaza to these crime syndicate families to run Gaza and have a better relationship with them, and not create a scenario where there's a two-state solution. That's what they're trying to do. And there's certainly a lot of people in Israel not happy with what's happened with October 7th and Netanyahu's approach to things. They want him out. There are protests happening in Israel against Netanyahu. But yes, I think the overreaction was not a good thing. It's, you have more people in the Western country against you. Now you have Iran also getting involved.
World War Three.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you just start. This will be the first world war that hasn't started in Europe. The first to emerge from Europe. This was the first one that wouldn't. And yeah, I think the two-state solution is certainly the way to go. But it's yeah, I don't think I don't think they're ever gonna. I just can't see it. I don't think they'll allow it. And it's the Western powers.
Well, yeah, I mean,
But this is interesting, right?
we like to think that all problems are solvable, and that if problems aren't solved, it means we're doing something wrong. And if only we try harder, we can solve the problem. But I think a glance at history will show that
Wishful thinking, right?
problems you can't solve.
Wishful
And
thinking.
often problems just get solved by the stronger party imposing their will militarily on the weaker party. And we might not like that, and we might think it's bad, but that's how historically a lot of problems have been dealt with. And that's, if you can't agree, if people can't agree, that's what happens in the end. The stronger party imposes their will.
Yeah, there's only two ways that you can.
Right now.
There's you either disagree and come to a solution, and that involves pain and suffering, which is what's going on, or you pretend to be happy, and eventually we're all doomed because we're just pretending to be happy. And it's like, why do we have, do we really want peace all the time in the world? Is that where is that going to leave us?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, we get into sort of a very deep philosophical discussion here, but that's, I mean, Friedrich Nietzsche's famous idea about the last man. That's what he was trying to get at with that idea. That, once we've solved all the world's problems and we've created the ideal society and when we've arrived at the end of history and we have the last man, what's life really going to be like for that person? They'll have no real challenges left to face. They'll have no real obstacles left to overcome. And what happens to man when he's got no challenges to face and no obstacles to overcome? It atrophies him, right? Like he becomes less of a person because people grow in response to challenge and they grow in response to struggle. And great men are created by great struggles and great causes. And if there's no more things to struggle over and there's no more great causes to fight for, then you can't have great men anymore. So that's basically a summary of Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of the last man. And that's why he critiqued this. That's his critique of this idea of trying to create the perfect society and trying to get to the end of history, like a lot of philosophers talked about. He thought there could be something bad about that. It could actually be bad for us.
Yeah, I think so. You won that challenge. All right, moving on. What do you think of Putin, his politics, Russia, and politics in Russia?
What do I think of Putin? Well, I don't know. Putin is obviously not an ideal leader. There's obviously
You don't like him? Come on.
Well, I think I don't. If you look at, he's quite popular in Russia, and he's done a lot of good things in terms of building Russia back up
From the Soviet
its
collapse.
relatively depleted state post the breakup of the Soviet Union. And so he's popular in Russia for that reason. He's strengthened the country. And so from a Russian point of view, in terms of doing what's good for the Russian people, he deserves some credit for that, even if he might be brutal and dictatorial and authoritarian in other ways, which we should rightly condemn him for. He does. I mean, I watched the Tucker Carlson interview. Have you seen
Yeah,
that?
I have, yeah.
So he seems to have got or at least wanted to sell himself as having this deep understanding of Russian history. And he tried to justify the idea of Ukraine belonging to the historical Russian motherland as a result of a deep understanding of Russian history. which I don't have a deep understanding of Russian history, so that may or may not be true. It sounded plausible what he was saying. My take on the Russia-Ukraine war is that you have to hold several ideas in your head at once, right? So it's obviously wrong for Russia to have invaded Ukraine and initiate the military action against a sovereign country. So that's true on the one hand. But on the other hand, the Western and NATO actions had the effect of sort of pushing Russia into a corner that made that sort of action more likely. And so you should also, I think, criticize the Western and NATO actions that made it more likely that Russia would make the decision to invade.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is basically the analysis of John Mearsheimer, who's arguably the most important or the held in the highest regard of all the international relations scholars in the world today. So I studied international relations at university, so I've got a master's degree in that. So I sort of followed the field of international relations a little bit, and that's how I know about Mearsheimer. So I've been a fan of his way of thinking about foreign relations since I studied that at university. And yeah, I mean, he goes on. I follow his YouTube channel and his blog and read what he thinks about things. I tend to agree with most of his analysis on the subject. And he thinks, Western actions pushed Russia. Basically, the West and NATO agreed not to expand towards Russia and incorporate countries that used to be part of the Soviet Empire into NATO. But they broke that kind of agreement. And, of course, Russia has historically considered Ukraine to be part of its, greater Russian area or whatever. And so this repeated action of expanding eastward on the part of NATO, and then the interference of, the CIA and other intelligence organizations in Ukraine, stirring up the coup, which installed pro-Western leadership into Ukraine when they did have a pro-Russian leader in their prior. All this sort of activity, it was made it more likely that Russia would invade. And so it's right, I think, to condemn that activity also from NATO that made the war more likely. Because, I mean, the scale of the casualties, I mean, was it like half of Ukraine's population has left? Something ridiculous. Most of them have just left the country. And the number of casualties is huge. And with the West is sending them a lot of weapons, but is that actually helping them, or is it just prolonging the warfare and leading to more of them dying? I mean,
yeah.
There has to be some sort of. I mean, I try to understand what the strategy is, and perhaps what's going on here is America and the West have actually learned their lesson from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. They realized that being involved in those wars for so long actually contributed to significantly weakening them. So maybe what they're trying to do is to rope Russia into being involved in a long, drawn-out conflict like that will similarly weaken Russia. Perhaps that's the strategy.
Yeah, I think the strategy more and more looks like is having Ukraine fall and Russia take over, and then using that to weaken Russia in some shape or form. It's hard to see Ukraine not falling, at least by the end of this year. I mean, it's,
the most likely solution, I think, is that it'll be partitioned, and Russia will control the eastern portions, and a sort of Western Ukraine, diminished Ukraine will remain in the West. That will basically be ruined largely. May take a long time to recover, may never recover. That seems to be the most likely outcome.
Yeah, I mean...
But who knows? I mean, something may change.
Something may change, and I think you have the peace agreement that Putin's keen to sign, that Turkey has put together. He mentioned that in Tucker Carlson interview. And it was Boris Johnson and Biden saying to Ukraine not to sign that, but go to war and we'll fund you. This is Putin's view.
I don't remember that.
Yep, yeah, it's in the podcast. There is you can look it up. There is a peace agreement put together by Turkey. I think it's called the Turkish Peace Agreement 2022 or 2021, something like that. That was, I think, basically the key principles was no NATO and a few other things. And it was Zelensky that did not sign it. And according to Putin, it was Boris Johnson that basically stopped the negotiations for signing that peace agreement. And then Boris Johnson came out on X, did a video saying, no, Putin's lying, blah, blah, blah. So he did a response, and I didn't watch the whole response, but Boris Johnson has come out and responded to what Putin said to him, said about his involvement in all of that, like damaging the peace negotiations. So that's one option. That, if you want to agree to some terms with Putin, then that's one option, and you keep Ukraine. I think it's you kind of condemn both the sides for sure, and then you can also justify both the sides in terms of the actions they're taking. Putin's pretty clear in terms of no NATO on his borders, so he's not gonna tolerate that. And there's reasons why. You obviously have different views. There's an interesting documentary out as well on Netflix. Obviously, it's very Western, American pointing finger at Putin documentary, but it's about the history of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of Putin and the situation that Ukraine is in now. It's interesting. I did watch that, but with some caution. You never know who's trying to sell you a viewpoint. Coming back to New Zealand and New Zealand politics, do you think giving the Justice Minister the media portfolio the right thing to do? Or is this Brazil all over again, where you have the Supreme Justice judge censoring and banning members of parliament and demanding X to remove certain people off X and create all the censorship?
Is this Paul Goldsmith?
Yeah.
What portfolios does he have again?
He's got the Justice Minister.
I know he was Arts, Culture and Heritage.
Justice Minister, I think.
He was Justice as well.
Yes, yeah.
Is that so? He's Justice. That's why he's in charge of like the Human Rights Commission.
I think so. Yeah.
And now he's media as
and
well.
And he's the one who's ordered. He's the one who's ordered a shutdown on working on the hate speech legislation, which I believe was a byproduct of the Christchurch call.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So I mean, the big drive for hate speech legislation did kind of arise out of the Christchurch call. But the Christchurch, I think it was a good thing. The Free Speech Union, I think, did good work in fighting against that hate speech law. It got a commitment from the government not to implement any more hate speech laws. Although we have found out the Law Commission is working on hate crime laws, and hate crime laws could involve speech as well. So I'm not sure how big a win we've really had there. With those hate crime law work still going on, because that's the hate crime laws is what our friend Humza Yusuf in the UK.
Yeah,
that's what he passed.
He did.
And then he got obviously reported a lot. On the first day of the referendum.
Did he? What did he get reported on?
That speech he gave.
Of course he got reported.
We
Yes,
discussed earlier.
Yeah.
That too many white people. This too many white people.
Yeah.
So I mean that was kind of a funny irony. But I mean, I don't know. What are you asking about Paul Goldsmith? That there's a potential for corruption if the Justice Minister and the Broadcasting Minister is the same portfolio. Is that
I think there is,
the
yeah,
idea?
well, you talk about them, getting rid of the hate speech legislation, but they're working on a hate crime legislation, which falls under justice, Ministry of Justice, in some shape or form to determine in the court systems what's a crime and what we charge against. And then you have him being Minister of Media and Communications, which will then also oversee what's going on online, online safety, what to censor, what not to censor, what's hate, what's not hate, what's free speech and what's hate.
Interesting.
And do you
Um,
see a conflict in there, or do you think there is not a conflict? Because we're seeing
well,
this
I mean,
conflict
I
happen in
hadn't I hadn't
Brazil.
put those things together in the way you're putting them together now, but I guess yeah, I mean, the way you've described it is a wee bit sinister. I mean, Paul Goldsmith seems like a good guy. I mean, I hope he wouldn't do anything like that. But I guess if you are, I guess there is a sort of complex of issues there that would make you if you did have the intention of being like the chief government censorship guy, he would have the right portfolios to be doing that now, wouldn't he? So I would hope that that's not what he's going to do, but it just so happens that he does have all the right portfolios now. So
Yeah, yeah. And what are you've posted something today about Christchurch Call. What are your thoughts on Christchurch Call? And is this something we should continue funding or being part of?
well, no, I don't think so. I mean, so the Christchurch call is about getting rid of. It was supposed to be about getting rid of terrorist content online, but it seems to have morphed into a global censorship operation where they're trying to put as much kind of speech they don't like into the terrorism bucket, if you know what I mean. So like the conflating, people who are against immigration, for example, with right wing terrorism, violent extremism, putting it all in the same bucket. So it seems like an attempt to control the national and the global conversation and to censor people with dissident views. Now, is it having that effect though, or is it having the opposite effect? I mean, it kind of seems, I mean, you've heard of the Streisand effect, right? So it kind of seems in some respects. I've got a lot of rain here. Can you hear the rain coming
I
through the
can hear
speakers?
the rain. Yeah, it's fun. Anyway, carry on. That's fine.
We're Yeah. So what was I saying? So because of the Streisand effect, is the Christchurch call having is it achieving its aims or is it achieving the opposite of its aims? I think that's kind of an open question. So if it really is achieving the opposite of its aims, then maybe I would support it continuing.
But we know that since October 7th, the amount of terrorist content online has increased. We know that. So you can,
Do we?
well, we can see, I mean, this whole pro Hamas protests are terrorist content. Wouldn't there be terrorist content? Wouldn't you classify?
I think there's a. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily. We want to avoid inciting violence, right? So speech and content that incites violence, I think there's a legitimate reason for taking that down. But it's debatable whether showing the violent acts on Twitter or on social media actually encourages more violence or discourages it. So, footage of the Wakely church stabbing, for example, does putting that on social media, that's not an encouragement to violence, that's just a depiction of some violence that happened. And it's not clear that putting that up on social media encourages more violence to occur.
Sure.
But it is clear that taking it off, preventing people from seeing it, would prevent people from having knowledge of a piece of news and information that might tell them that violence is becoming more common as a result of the Australian government's immigration policies. Um, so, I mean, that's my concern, really, that
Yeah.
they're trying to, they say they're trying to prevent terrorism, but my suspicion is they're really trying to shut down political views
Yeah.
that they don't like.
Yes. Yes. I think that's Christchurch Call in a nutshell. And that's what we see.
Yeah. So, but the news that's come through from the story that News Talk ZB has broken last night is that and one of the organisations of the Christchurch Call has pulled out,
Do you know who
and
that
the
is?
reason that uh, no, I couldn't remember the name off the top of my
Okay.
head. Um, it's some sort of technology company organisation that was part of it.
Yeah.
And the revelations that have come out is that they were auditing the compliance of the member countries and organisations with their requirements under the Christchurch Call. So if you're a member of the Christchurch Call, you have to do certain stuff to try and reduce terrorist content or censor certain people. And the members weren't doing what they were supposed to do. So they were talking a good game, but they weren't doing it. However, the Christchurch Call didn't want to publicly release these evaluation reports they did, because they thought that if they did, then the members would say, well, bugger you, if you're just going to talk negatively about us, we won't have anything to do with with the Christchurch Call anymore. So it's a collective action problem, right? So this organisation has left because they thought, well, if we can't audit them, if we can't evaluate them, and we can't distribute these evaluations of their poor performance, this organisation is basically useless. And so the question remains is whether more organisations are going to leave the Christchurch Call, and whether it should really exist, whether Luxon should defund it. If it's not doing anything, as these evaluation reports, if we're to believe this, show, then why is the New Zealand government still funding it?
Yeah, and I wonder whether there is like a bigger impact to us defunding it because it's called Christchurch Call and because it started from the Christchurch mosque attacks. If New Zealand was to defund it, that basically means Jacinda is out of the picture, who is the main flagship person for this entire organization. The entire thing collapses.
Yeah, well, Jacinda will be fine, right? Jacinda has a huge public profile. She's going to get a job somewhere. We don't need to worry about Jacinda.
Yeah, but if she's removed from the
But
picture,
we do need to worry about whether it's appropriate for the New Zealand government to still be funding this organisation. They say they're trying to cut wasteful spending. Well, what are you getting out of funding the Christchurch Call?
yeah, of course, yeah. Definitely not fund it and shut it down for sure. And it was interesting to also, I think I did a story about all the countries and all the organizations that are part of it. X is still listed as one of the partner organizations on Christchurch Call. Given their views on censorship, I'm surprised that their name is still on the Christchurch Call website. That was an interesting observation that I had. And I keep trying to find some information on what their views are on the Christchurch Call, but there don't seem to be any. It's interesting that they're not speaking against Christchurch Call or have any views on it.
Yeah, well, I'm not aware of any public statements that Elon Musk has made specifically about the Christchurch Call, but I know Australia has an e-safety commissioner, which has a similar function. She's the one leading to the charge to take down the videos of the Wakely church stabbing, and leading the charge in a number of different areas to censor content off Twitter and other social media as well. And Elon Musk is having a back and forward with her, and she, ironically, is a former member of Twitter who was fired when Elon Musk came in because he fired a bunch of people, a lot of the people who were working in the online safety space.
Yeah, interesting.
So she got fired from that job, and then she goes straight over to become Australia's e-safety commissioner, which is quite a bit funny, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that kind of tells what's really going on and why she's going after Elon. And there's obviously some some other agenda than just the e-safety thing. And the outcome of all of that is Anthony Albanese has become the the most trending meme around the world than actually getting any censorship out of it. And X is the most downloaded app in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, it's having positive effects on free speech, arguably.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show. This has been really fun. It's really good to finally speak with you on the show. Any other final things you want to add, or any topics you want to cover, or anything you want to share about any exciting thing you're working on?
no, no, I mean, I can't tell everyone all the stuff that I do because people don't always want to be publicly associated with me. So
Yeah.
I am working on a lot of things behind the scenes. Um, be interesting to see what happens with this midwifery scope of practice stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe not everyone thinks that's the most interesting thing, but I'll be interested to see what happens there.
Yeah. Well, can people find information about the Conservative Network? Is there a website or a Twitter handle where people can go and look at information?
There's a Substack at the moment.
Okay, great. What's the Substack?
Uh, conservativenetwork.substack, something like that. I can't remember.
Okay,
exactly.
cool.
You can access it through my Twitter page.
Okay. Can you give people your Twitter page and any other pages that they can look up your work?
So my Twitter is at the Zeitgeist NZ. It's my own name, William McGimpsey. Look that up. That's the best way of seeing the things that I'm involved in.
Awesome, man. Well, I look forward to having another podcast with you in person. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.